My name is Spencer Higa, and you're listening to the Drop Jaw Flies podcast.
Boom!
Because I knew I just caught 5 hogs, and I was proud. And
I'm Lance Egan, and I forgot what I was supposed to say.
It's like sending a receiver over the middle with linebackers just waiting, and the receiver turns back at the quarterback, catches the ball, and then he's knocked out for like half hour.
just stick them solid.
Welcome to the Drop Jaw Flies podcast, your source for fly fishing talk, tips, and stories. In this episode, Jason and I cover 10 common fly fishing mistakes. We reflect on our past year of fishing and discuss mistakes we made and common mistakes that are easy to overlook. We wanted to share these items with you to hopefully help you avoid unwanted hooks in your skin and to also help increase your chances of success while on the water. We hope you enjoy our podcast. You can subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, and our YouTube channel. I'm Chad Nelson along with my co-host Jason Arvey. Here is today's podcast. Okay, we were actually trying to film this podcast last week, but we were out fishing and the wind was just hurricane force winds, 30, 40 mile an hour gusts. Needless to say, too much background noise to shoot that podcast. So we're here at Jason's house and we want to talk about fishing mistakes. We've had this discussion a few times in the last week, kind of reflecting on the last year fishing. And we racked up a list of mistakes that we made.
Yeah, and they're easy to make too. It's things that you really need to be aware of and can really help you out if you are aware of it and you correct it. Your fishing day will be a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we're going to do a top 10. 9 of these 10 are mine, so I've got a lot to work on. But
we all do, brother.
Looking back, though, I lost a lot of fish because of some of these. And, you get going. Man, you're just into the moment. You're chasing a fish. We rarely pause to even eat lunch. And so pausing to think about some of these things, change out, the hook, the line, whatever, it's tough to think about.
Yeah.
And you don't want to take the time to do it. But like I say, it's cost me some fish. So let's jump into it.
Let's do it.
10 common mistakes I think fly fishermen make, and 10 mistakes I've made. Number 1 is using worn tippet and line. Where we fish, where I think where a lot of guys fish, there's a lot of rocks, branches, things that your tippet and line rubs against, scrapes against.
Constantly.
Maybe you're getting caught. And worn tippet, obviously, is a weaker tippet.
It can be a really bad mistake, especially if you have that fish of a lifetime on and you're playing him and there's a fray or a nick in your tippet and you just overstress it.
Yeah.
Say goodbye to the fish. And it could have been, resolved. It could have been fixed.
Yeah, I hooked up a fish a few months ago and it broke my tippet. And I think for this very reason. It was worn, it was weakened, and I lost the fish and I lost my streamer.
Did you want to kick your own backside?
Yes. I should have called you over to kick it for me.
Well, there's other things besides the tippet too, guys. Like before you go on a trip, it's really good to clean your line with a cleaner or with some dish soap, just a drop of dish soap in some warm water. Grab a rag, run your line all the way through it. And while you're doing that, feel for any nicks. Last year, I can't remember where we were, but I was making this double haul. And I pulled on the line, and it was the weirdest feeling. Like there was no spring to the rod or whatever. And I was holding the line in one hand, and my line went out the rod. And so, thank goodness there wasn't a big fish on there. But if I would have paid more attention to the nicks in my fly line, could have avoided, that whole situation, because the rest of the day I needed that particular line and it was gone. So tippet and line.
Yeah, so it's a good idea regularly to check your tippet and line, and try to pay attention if your line is rubbing on rocks and branches throughout the day. Just be aware of that.
Stepping on it too.
Yeah.
And one more thing, just while we're online, because when you're fishing in a place where there's a lot of rocks and you're stripping your line back and it's piling up at your feet on those rocks, it'll get coiled around the bottom of them, or brush or whatever, and you get lazy after a while and you rip your line, try to pull those rocks up, and you don't take the time to uncoil it, your line's gonna be ruined really quick. So stripping basket, or just take the time to pull it up carefully, make sure that you can shoot cleanly.
Well, and how many times too do we do a back cast and maybe your line gets hooked on a weed or a branch behind you? Now, if it's weeds, which happens to us sometimes, we use a heavier tippet because of our big flies, and it's easy just to give that a yank because you can pull it out of the weeds, but that's rubbing on your tippet too. And be careful when you do that. Sometimes the hook may come shooting back at you and stick in the back of your ear. That may or may not have happened.
It was a good look.
Yeah, always wanted an earring. So. Okay, number 2, and it's kind of along the same line, but maintaining sharp hooks, or not maintaining sharp hooks. Trout and fish have tough mouths, and catching on all of these rocks and branches and things that we're talking about obviously can dull the hooks, and it makes it harder to set the hook.
Oh yeah. So especially the big cutthroat that we like to catch, big browns, the inside of their jaw, their mouth just gets so hard that you have to really pull to set one of the hooks. And so a good test before you go out, I've used this fly before, and especially you probably reuse your flies over and over until you lose one, and that it's no fun. But a good way to test it is just to pull it along your fingernail, and if it sticks, you're in good shape. But if you can just run it right across your fingernail, like this back hook, I've used this a lot and I need to sharpen these, but you can see that it doesn't really stick that well. So if I was to go out and use this and have a big cutty attached to it, set the hook, and it'd be hard. I'd probably lose it.
Well, and I can remember several times, and I'm sure everybody experiences this, but you get your fish in, and thank goodness you got him in because you maintain tension on the line. But as soon as you get him into the net, the hook falls out of his mouth.
Yeah, and then you're thankful. How did that happen?
And we don't always fish with nets, and we've lost fish because of that.
Sharpen your hooks.
Yeah. I mean, I went months without sharpening hooks initially, and lesson learned.
Yeah, it's easy to take a hook file with you. Just keep it on your nippers or in your pocket, somewhere easily accessible, because that's another thing you can get lazy about not doing is first checking, and then if it is dull, sharpening it.
Yeah.
So
So just make a conscious effort to do that again, throughout the day too. Number 3, Jason, is using a tool like a lippa to remove hooks. I mean,
I think you're going to be able to insert some pictures on this one about why that would be important. The fish have really sharp teeth. So a lot of us put our thumb and our finger inside the fish's mouth, and you start wiggling the hook, and they don't like that, and they start to move their head back and forth, and it's like a little saw, and you'll get puncture holes and scrapes and abrasions from their teeth. But the really scary thing is if you use these articulated hooks, and this happens to have 3 hooks, if this one's stuck in the mouth and he starts moving and you're trying to remove that hook and he pulls another one of these trailing hooks into your other hand.
Yeah.
So a lippa tool, I don't know, Rising's got a really cool tool. There might be a few others, but that's a handy tool to use to try and safeguard that, or use a glove. But they'll cut your gloves too if they're neoprene or.
Oh yeah. Sometimes because we are using bigger tippet, these big flies, we can get fish in quickly. And they still have a lot of go, a lot of fight when you get them in. And so trying to remove the hook when they still have a lot of fight. And it's good for the fish because you're not wearing them out and then releasing them. But, there's the challenge to you of getting the hook out safely.
Yeah, I'm not really interested in fighting the fish. Like, I don't want to feel it bouncing. I did a long time ago, but now I just want to get that fish in to help save it, to increase its chance of not ending up a statistic. And so when they do come to the net or your hand, just like you said, holy smokes, it can be go time right there for that fish. And then you really got to be careful.
Well, and Steven Ranella, for those familiar with him, he runs that Meat Eater TV show and a podcast. His brother is a wildlife biologist, and I heard him state the statistic of about 1/3 of fish they estimate caught don't survive when they're released. And so I think getting them in faster and releasing them when they still have energy left will help change that statistic.
Yeah, and just one more thing on that, especially in the summer months when the water temperature, especially at the surface, is really warm, the fish just don't have much oxygen to recover with, and that's where you're letting them go, is right there at the surface. So the quicker you can get them in, it's just so much better for the fish, especially in the summer.
Yeah. I think everybody would like to use a net and a lippa and all the cool tools out there. The challenge is that's just a lot of gear to carry. So we've gone to bigger packs just so we can carry more gear. Now, we have to remember to take our packs off throughout the day while fishing because it gets your back tired. But, carry as many good tools as you can.
Amen.
Okay, number 4 is missing prime fishing hours. I think some guys do this because it's either hard to get up in the morning or they don't want to walk out in the dark at night, especially if you're going somewhere deep into the backcountry. But I would just say you got to do it. I think anyone can go without a good night's rest for one night. But where it becomes a challenge, Jason, is if you are going on a 2 or 3 day fishing trip and getting up early and staying out late night after night. That can be challenging.
Yeah, definitely. But if you want to catch that big fish and you're fishing from shore, it's almost, you have to get out there before the sun comes up, and then fish that evening hour from when it starts to get dark, even after sundown by maybe a couple hours, which could be till 11. Mm-hmm. And then the fishing could stay good until all through the dark. So take a headlamp and prepare for that.
But I can't remember one time where I got up early and stayed out till dark, whether fishing or hunting, and I regretted it. Because that's when the wildlife are active. That's especially when the fish are active. And man, you just got a better chance at catching more fish or that big one if that's what you're after.
Yeah, and the hot months, I would say June, July, August, September, especially, you got to plan to fish after sundown.
Mm-hmm.
So
grab an energy packet, dump it in your water bottle, and get up and go.
Check the batteries in your headlamp or flashlight and prepare for that.
Yeah, we always have headlamps in our packs. Absolutely. And we'll get into that later, number 10. Number 5 is poor knots. And looking back, Jason, I can, coming from the spin fishing world, my go-to knot was the clinch knot. That's what everybody uses. And so I'm pretty good at that knot. I can look back several times where, we're fishing a river and I can see a big fish right in front of me, right when I'm changing my hook. And so I'm in a hurry and I just tied the clinch knot. Didn't take the time to tie the non-slip loop knot, which is a stronger, better knot. especially for these big streamers. I hooked up that fish and my knot broke. My knot came untied and I lost the fish and I lost my streamer. He swam off with it. So,
But that's happened to all of us before.
and I can't say it was being lazy. It was just being in a hurry and not doing it the right way.
Well, because the improved clinch knot or clinch knot, whatever, that's a really good knot. I mean, it can be strong if you seat it properly. But like you're saying, for this type of streamer, for streamer fishing, it's not the ideal knot. Like you're saying, because it doesn't allow the fly right here at the eye of the hook to move and swing freely. You don't get the same movement. But you're right. It's just take the time to tie the right knot so that your flies look better in the water, especially streamers.
Absolutely.
The non-slip loop is the way to go.
And yeah, I did the wrong knot, but maybe I didn't even seat it right either. Maybe I was just in such a hurry that I didn't take the time to make sure it was a secure, strong knot. And so you got to take the time to do that.
You had big fish fever. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like buck fever. Like you go to chamber around and there's no bullet in it, in the chamber, because you got excited. But yeah, good knots. It's important.
And on that note too, then take the time to practice tying knots. So you have those 4 or 5 knots that are your go-to knots, and you can do them well and in a quick amount of time.
Practice at home while you're watching football.
Yeah.
Especially yesterday with my team's game. That was horrible. 3-9. That was all. I could have done knots and practiced it.
You could have tied, a lot of flies.
All right.
Okay. Following up poor knots is poor casting. And poor casting for the situation. Now, I can look back at several times, and again, I was just learning to cast. But again, I see the big fish. Jason put me in a good spot, good fish, and I go to make that cast, and I either hook the far bank bush or my fly ends up in the tree behind us. And how many times did I screw up a prime situation because of a poor cast? So I wasn't well practiced, and there's, I could have maybe used a roll cast or a different type of cast and had a better opportunity at it.
Well, poor casting or casting in general is something that's a lifelong endeavor. So as much as you practice it, I mean, you've gotten really, really good in a short amount of time. But I would practice as much as I can, even if it's 10 minutes or here and there, to go out on the lawn and practice your double haul, practice those skills, because each time you do, it just helps you. When you get on the water, you'll be better suited for whatever situation that may arise. But the double haul, work on that, especially, because we're talking about this in a streamer context, and double haul will help you get these big flies out there to where the fish might be. So,
yeah, I mean, it's a mistake, but like you say, it just takes time and it takes practice. So, I just keep my rod in my truck. It's in there 24/7. We're at my daughter's soccer game the other day. It was a boring game, so my son and I just went and grabbed our rods, and
nice.
We were out there practicing casting.
Nice. That's how you do it. You just take time here and there. But yeah, it is a lifelong thing. I mean, I've never seen or heard anybody, even the proficient casters, say, "I've arrived." Like I'm there. It's always something that I'll be doing. Because I love it too. But.
Well, and I've heard a lot of experts like Lance Egan. We had him on our podcast a month ago or so, and they all say the same thing. The time to practice is not necessarily on the water, but it's at home. It's at the park, your backyard, wherever you have room to practice.
Just like if you went deer hunting and you were up there on the mountain glassing, and you're like, I'm going to take some practice shots. I mean, that's just not the time to do it. So
no, that 50-yard downhill archery shot, the time to practice isn't when you have the elk in your sights, right?
Right. Yeah, I would at least try to do 5 to 10 minutes a day if you're really serious, if you can. But at least once a week. Like, you've got to do it once a week at least.
Yeah. Okay, next one. One that I've screwed up again several times is being too visible or too noisy. And part of that is understanding fish water, where the fish are. You know, you're wading upstream and you take that step and you see a nice brown trout go shooting out from where you just stepped. So not casting where you're stepping.
Yeah, and that's been talked about a lot, maybe for a while, is to fish the water at the beginning of the stream bank and then fish out. And so a lot of people that I've seen will just walk right up to the bank and not fish that area first. Maybe they know already that there's no fish there, and you know that's explainable. But if you don't know that, then you would want to kind of stay back from the bank if you're visible to the fish that may be holding right on the edge of the bank, and just do a couple casts there. Make sure there's nothing there. There still might be. They just didn't hit your fly, but just keep fishing out into the middle of the river or the other side of the bank, but cover that whole thing first and just, give yourself a better shot at a fish.
Yeah, absolutely. And then too, being noisy, there's ways to walk through the water quieter where you're not sending a lot of, waves out through the water that the fish will sense and feel. But we are actually going to cover this topic in its own podcast here in the near future. And we've got a great guest who knows what he's doing when it comes to this topic. So look forward to that.
Yeah, definitely. And then another thing is fish can see colors as good as we can, and possibly better. It's being researched. Some people are that bored to research that topic. But anyway, so on a bright sunny day, you're probably going to see us in blue to kind of match, or green to match the surroundings. I like to wear blue. Mm-hmm. But if it's heavy foliage, is that a word?
I think you just made up a word, yeah.
Well,
it is now.
Foliage in the dictionary would mean greenery, bushes, trees, grass, shrubs, that kind of thing. So I would wear something that blended in with that, just to give ourselves a better shot at not spooking a fish before we can make a cast to it.
Yeah. Yep, good tips. Okay, next one is poor casting, too much false casting. I think that increases your odds of getting tangled again, but it can also increase the odds of scaring the fish too.
Yeah, definitely.
I think false casting is fun. Guys like to do it, but I've noticed when I do too much, 3 or 4. If I go more than 3, I'm screwing it up. That's just...
Well, yeah, so you would do it either to lengthen your line out to get to where you need to go, or to possibly dry a fly, but the fish are in the water, right? I mean, it's a common thing that's been said forever that the fish, you got to have the fly on top of the water or in the water to catch a fish. So false casting is just that much more time your fly is not available for the fish.
Well, if you're a proficient caster like Jason, your 3rd or 4th false cast, you're just getting warmed up. But me, that 3rd or 4th one, it's going into the bushes or trees, or it's my line's tangling at rocks at the bottom. But I would only take as many as is absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
And then number 9 kind of goes along with this, and that's having too much line out. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong with it. Tangle, snag, you're rubbing your line, like we talked about, number 1. So don't have too much line out.
You'll know when you do, because your timing's all messed up and you're not able to load your rod because the line hasn't gone and rolled out behind you. You're starting your forward cast and the line is still hung up in the air in a loop, and it just turns into a mess. So strip in some line back and then figure out where you can cast. But that just goes along, Chad, with kind of practicing, because you'll know that usually before you get out on the water if you're practicing a lot.
In our last podcast with John Bailey, this was his number 1 tip to guys, is not trying to cast too much line. You know, if you are very comfortable and a great caster out to 20 feet, then cast 20 feet of line.
Yeah.
But when I let out 30 or 40 feet of line, I want to try to use it all. And that's when I get into trouble.
Yeah, I remember back in the early 90s, I was talking to a fly shop owner, and there was a conversation in the shop that day about how far people could cast. And I remember I was pretty good friends with the owner of the shop, and he held up a reel and he was like, yeah, I can cast all the line on this reel. And to me, that was like, what? Because I'd only been using maybe 40. I didn't even know that was possible back then. It was like 93 or 4.
Yeah.
Anyway, that set me off on a course, a challenge of to see if I could do that. And it was quite a while, but years went by before I could. But
Well, you can cast further than anyone I've seen.
and a lot of people say, well, is that helpful? And it is. Sometimes it is. So
Depending on where you're fishing. But, you know, I listened to a recent podcast with Kelly Gallup, and he said studies show the average cast for fly fishermen is 18 feet, meaning 18 feet of line plus whatever your tippet is. So if you're proficient out to 20 feet or 30 feet, that's an average cast, and that'll get you most places you need to go.
yeah, especially for the guys who are really good at stalking and being quiet, like we mentioned earlier. You won't need to cast that far if you can really get in close to the fish without them knowing you're there.
Yeah.
But having the skills to throw flies, big flies, small flies, dry flies, a long ways can be helpful. I know
Yep.
one day on the Henry's Fork, there was some dry flies, some green drakes that were coming up quite a ways from where we had the boat anchored. And I won't mention his name just because I don't know if he'd be embarrassed or not. But we were throwing casts like 80, 90 feet at these fish to try and hook them up, and we were doing it. We weren't landing them, but to be able to do that was just fun. Mm-hmm. So,
Yeah, the challenge is finding a place where you have that much room to backcast.
yeah.
But certainly when we get up on our reservoir, you know, some of the bigger rivers like the Green, the Snake, our reservoir, being able to cast 50 out to 80, 90 feet, like you said, it helps.
Yeah, and especially where we're walking the shore and the fish aren't quite in as close as we would like them to be because the water's still pretty warm. So they're out where it's cooler.
Yeah.
And if you can make the cast out there and get the fish's attention, you know, they'll follow it back. But you've got to be able to get it out there far enough to get to where the fish are so they see what your fly, you know, what you're throwing. So.
But what I've found, Jason, is I've had days where I spent more time untangling my line because I was trying to cast 60, 70 feet out. And that was less time that my fly was in the water. So if I had just done a 30 to 40 foot cast, which I'm comfortable with now, better chance of me catching a fish than trying to get it way out there. And every time I'm screwing it up. Yeah,
I think you're right. If you can cast 40 feet of line and then shoot maybe 10 to 15, you're on the right track. And so that's a good mark to shoot for.
Yeah. So fish the way you're comfortable with. When you're at the park or at home, that's when you practice the longer casts.
Yes, very good.
Okay, number 10, plan to go further than you plan to go. How many times have we made a plan and we're out until midnight, or we're 2 miles further than we planned to go, and a couple times we ran out of water, we didn't have enough food, we just weren't prepared.
I think every time, because when you're walking around the shore or on a river and you just want to see what's around the next bend, and then when you get to that bend, you want to see what's next, and we go a lot longer than we planned. So extra food.
Yeah, which we usually have, and we always do carry a water filter. So where we drink our water bottles dry, we were able to filter water and
every time.
But yeah, when you're going for the day, just be prepared. And we've done podcasts on this, items that are always in our pack. You know, our backcountry fishing podcast and other podcasts, we talk about this. So
Yeah. It's important.
Yeah.
'Cause we are going to walk further than we planned to, for sure.
two other items that came to mind as I was driving over here this morning. Well, you brought up one of them. So this is a top 10 list, but I'm going to add two more. One is sunglasses. And I think we'll get into this more in the future podcast when we're talking about sight fishing and river fishing. But polarized sunglasses, they're a must.
Yeah, for two reasons. One, and like you said, we're going to talk about it more in depth, but to avoid this, because that's without your eyes, I mean, yeah, life's not much fun. And also just to help you see into the water better. And I wish I would have worn them a lot more or better ones when I was younger, because now I have like some canyons starting to develop right here around my eyes. But then I just said, screw it. I was getting older and oh well. But sunglasses are super important. And then
well, and on that note too, make sure your sunglasses are actually polarized. I owned a pair. Well, I still own them. I don't fish with them anymore, but I used to wear a pair a couple years ago. And for 6 months, I thought they were polarized, and they really weren't. And it makes such a difference having sunglasses that are actually polarized.
how did you know? Because I finally go, I can't see in the water.
Well, for some reason I put on yours, or I tried yours on. We were just comparing sunglasses, and I was like, "What the blazes? Yours were so much better." And mine, I was told they were polarized. I mean, they weren't printed on the lens polarized, but anyhow, they weren't, and it makes a huge difference.
For sure. We'll hit that one in depth next time.
Yeah.
And then, Chad, why don't you show them this next one?
Well, so number 12 that I would add is when you're stringing up your rod, meaning you want to fasten your hook somewhere while you're walking to your next fishing hole, don't hook your hook right into the guide right here like this, because that can damage your guide. And especially when even the slightest scratch in your guide, when you're trying to shoot line, that's going to rub on your line and wear your line where you don't want any rubs or abrasion on your fly line. So I think the better place to hook it, if you don't have a hook right down by the handle, just on the brace of your guide right here.
And most rods kind of did away with the hook keeper, because it just, when you're shooting line, the line always gets wrapped up around it. So this is your best option right here, is to just do on one of the guide supports, not in the guide ring itself, but yeah, just right there.
Yeah. Safer. It'll save your guide and, potentially save your line from unwanted wear. So that's it, man. That's 12 tips, mistakes that we have made, most of them mine, but if you can kind of be conscious about those things as you're going throughout your day fishing, I think it'll increase your chances of success and save you from hooks in the ear and in the finger and help you catch more fish.
That's right. It could have been a top 1,000 list, but because of time, this was a great list, and it'll definitely help out people who are fishing.
Yeah.
Good tips.
Okay, guys, thanks for listening. We hope these tips were helpful. And as always, stay safe on all of your fishing adventures, and remember to stick 'em solid.
All right, friends, thanks for listening to the Drop Jaw Flies podcast. Please send us your feedback. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook, and on our website, www.dropjawflies.com. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, or on our YouTube channel. Now get out there and hook a big one and stick 'em solid.